Reinsurance Business recently had the pleasure of being on the ground at the 2025 Bermuda Risk Summit. There, we caught up with reinsurance and insurance executives to hear their perspectives on the vital questions facing the industry today. In this episode of Reinsurance Business TV, we ask, what is the biggest challenge you see facing the reinsurance market in 2025?
Yeah, I think there are a number of challenges facing the reinsurance market this year. First is, we started the year with a fairly large wildfire. It's a rough start to the year, an earnings event. It's not a capital event for the industry, but I think it brings up the topic of climate change. Right? It was the largest wildfire in history. By a factor of 2 to 3, depending on what you think the industry losses, and climate change is just a major topic for the industry. The impact of frequency and severity of cat losses. You had $80 to $100 billion of loss, depending on what you think loss estimates between September and January, between Hurricane Milton, Helene, and the wildfires. There's definitely increased frequency and severity. Wildfire in California should not be unexpected. Large wildfires should not be unexpected. Pricing for the risk is critically important. But wildfire in particular is one of the perils. Flood, there are other perils, is not a California-only event. I live in New Jersey. I was driving last weekend or the weekend before and got stuck in a traffic jam with all sorts of emergency vehicles going by. And I said, oh my gosh, that must be a terrible accident. It was a big wildfire on the side of the highway. I had never seen that before. I've been living in New Jersey my entire life. Not a lot of, there were properties in the area, not a big damage event, but the Carolinas had wildfire. So it's just, I think climate change is a big topic. I think the other topics are casualty, adequacy of casualty pricing, the impacts of litigation finance, social inflation. It's very line specific, but that's a big topic. I think the regulatory response. This is largely U.S. dominated conversation, but the regulatory response to some of the things we're talking about is a big topic of conversation, and then fairly hard to ignore the global economic uncertainty that we all see every day, and the implications that has on all product in the industry globally. So I think those are the big topics.
As insurers and reinsurers, uncertainty is kind of a double-edged sword. We obviously. Our business is about dealing with uncertainty and helping other people deal with uncertainty. But at the same time, it's something that any business looks at uncertainty from the negative standpoint as well. 2025, I don't think is particularly more uncertain than other recent years, but maybe there are more drivers of uncertainty than perhaps there have been sort of recently. When I think about what we can control, then a lot of it's around, where we are in the cycle. And everyone talks about the cycle. It's really lots of mini cycles, and there are lots of different pricing cycles. And by pricing, obviously inclusive of terms and conditions as well. And I think, one of the challenges that we're facing now is making sure that the market takes the opportunity to ensure that the rates are as firm as they can be, as we look through the rest of the year. Obviously a year where on the property side, there have been events early in the year. And that's following on the back of a few years where, the frequency and severity of natural catastrophe events has been clearly elevated. So I think there's those parts we can control around rate and terms and conditions. I do think the environment's ripe for some firming as well, in various pockets. The challenge is, it's something we're faced with every few years. And as an industry, it's really important that we make sure we're being paid the appropriate price for the risk that we're taking on. So I think that's on the side that we can control. I think, the other elements, there are things that we can't control so much. I think the increasing frequency and severity clearly events we can price for, but we can't change the underlying facts. And then clearly the geopolitical environment is very uncertain at the moment. And that, is going to have an impact on global economies, whether that's in terms of growth overall, growth in terms of individual pockets and individual countries and their own growth ambitions and so on. Economic policy, all of those things are going to be factored in. But I think to a large extent, as an insurance and reinsurance sector, where we take risk is on largely, particularly for a company like Conduit, we take that on the underwriting side of the balance sheet. The asset side of the balance sheet, while it may be impacted by things in the short term, typically our asset portfolio is very high quality, quite short duration. And therefore, if there are mark-to-market movements because of wider conditions, then those will play out over time and shouldn't have a lasting impact. So I think we're not unusual in that way for people in the P&C sector.
As you know, Mia, we started in director and officer liability insurance in the public D&O space. We're just following last week, which was the Plus D&O conference, and as predicted, there was a lot of doom and gloom. We're coming at it with a different view where we take a slightly more optimistic view of where the market's headed. So for example, in the D&O space, you've had a record number of IPOs in 2018, 19, 20, and 21, followed by a record low of new issues. And you've got a commensurate increase in supply of D&O insurance with a decrease in demand for D&O insurance. We're seeing that dynamic change right now. Obviously, it's a very volatile market, and for Banyan, that's a great place to be. So as we look to grow, we look to expand in the D&O market, we've got some exciting new steps, and we're adding capacity right now. So we're adding to that D&O line, and think of it as if we have our surfboard, we're ready for the waves. So we're seeing the D&O market, potentially look a lot like it did in 2015, 2016, up until 2018, where you've got significant losses, lots of demand for the product, and a very challenging aspect from a capital standpoint. So all of that for us is exciting. We understand that it's a volatile and challenging market. There's certainly challenging losses out there. Where we look at the market right now, we're seeing some green shoots come up through the middle to the end of this year and for years ahead. The most exciting part is our new growth in excess casualty with Alan. So love to hear more about that.
And so in excess casualty, the challenge that we have is really the legal system in the U.S. A lot of our clients are predominantly domiciled in the U.S. And we've noticed social inflation ramping up recently. We've noticed very large jury verdicts, all affecting our clients. So finding solutions for those challenges is what is exciting for us in excess casualty. And we're new capacity into Bermuda, and we're finding that some of our carriers in the island are cutting back on capacity, which means opportunities for Banyan.
So for the cyber reinsurance market, there are two key themes that are emerging and will be topic of discussion in the next few months. So the first being just understanding the risk itself, and especially the systemic risk. Cyber is that multifaceted, nuanced peril, and modeling systemic risk is challenging. The events of 2024 were key in sort of highlighting and raising a certain sense of awareness, but there's more work to be done. So at Moody's, when we think about the systemic risk, critical research is at the center of it. How can we better model systemic risk? How can we reduce uncertainty and support the sustainable growth of this insurance market? So when you're thinking about just modeling a physical model or building out a physical model to think about the anatomy of a cloud outage, understanding where your reliance is on critical operations, how are people generating revenue, which really allows you and opens the doors for better understanding of business interruption and contingent business interruption losses. Whether it's supply chain events and understanding those, a nuanced and sophisticated threat actor module to understand what those threats look like, and ultimately getting to the drivers of loss. I think these are some of the key topics which will become and are topical for this reinsurance market, which we are also looking at evolving as we develop new models. And there are new updates coming this year, which will help sort of start or kickstart that conversation and discussion. So the second topic that is dominating discussions in the cyber reinsurance world is around diversification. We've heard it before, it's been the theme of 2024, and I feel like it's going to be the theme of 2025. Now, cyber is a very difficult peril to diversify. So unlike NatCat perils, where geography is very straightforward for you to diversify your portfolios and your risk, cyber requires a lot more than that. So it's the amalgamation of different aspects of a company. So how big you are. Is it an SME or a large size business? Do you have concentration in particular industry segments? Jurisdiction or geography does play a role there as well. And then on top of that, you add like your tech stack and your technology aggregations. And even then, who uses what provider is not sufficient to achieve that diversification. Understanding the critical operations that you're using it for, that is your key. So that's one of the themes for cyber itself, that how do we diversify cyber specifically in the tail? And when we start to think about reinsurance and alternative capital, the structuring and the innovation in the coverage starts to play a role there as well. So I do see this being as one of the topics in the upcoming months as well.
Well, frankly, I think, what is in the biggest of all pictures, what is impacting the reinsurance market is what's impacting everybody else, which is that simply we are going through a tectonic shift right now. In fact, I would say it's a paradigm shift, really. Today, in the near term, everybody is most focused on what the biggest agitator is on that front, which of course is the U.S. government. We've had a change in administration, and Donald Trump has hit the ground running with an agenda that's not always clearly articulated to market participants, corporations, and the like. And they are constantly trying to anticipate what actual overall policy is going to be and what that's going to mean for the marketplace. But what we're seeing is kind of a bifurcation of what is, what's sort of facing companies and corporate leaders and boards today. And I would say those two things are: one, in the short term, there's kind of chaos in the policymaking, or perception that there's chaos in policymaking. And that's leading to some, I would say, perverse corporate decision-making or corporate activities. Let's put it that way, right? In other words, the uncertainty acts like a tax in the sense that it incents behavior that companies wouldn't normally take under more benign circumstances. And this is felt most particularly, I would say, in the traded goods section, obviously, because one of the big areas of uncertainty is tariffs, right? So what you're seeing is enormous inventory build, as an example. In other words, companies are importing, manufacturers in the U.S. are importing, basic and intermediate goods, and they're tying up working capital in inventory as a result. So on the one hand, you're getting these kind of near-term activities you wouldn't necessarily anticipate or actually desire. But longer term, this kind of policy making is creating bigger issues for those who are trying to make strategic decisions, right? Where your supply chain is going to be, what markets you're going to open, where you're going to build that next factory, because of the uncertainty of what the U.S.'s relationships with its trading partners and trading adversaries are going to look like, what the overall tariff regime is going. There's just this sort of inertia right now, and so the animal spirits that were meant to be or anticipated to be unleashed with this new administration have yet to kind of emerge, right? So while pro-growth policies on the taxation front and the regulatory front are looming out there and may yet still come to pass, the reality of it is it's taking a while, and it's stopping this behavior. So this kind of unleashing of M&A activity and IPO activity in the United States kind of remains curtailed at this point. But that is all in the near term, or the immediately foreseeable future. What I think a lot of companies, and this goes particularly for those in financial services, and I include in that the insurance and reinsurance business, therefore, right, is what is the actual operating paradigm going to look like? Because what companies and their predecessor managements have done well, the companies that have been doing well, are the ones that have kind of mastered the key variables of the international rules-based order, or globalization, if you want to call it that, right? Taking advantage of global labor rate differentials, the free flow of capital, a just-in-time, close to zero cost supply chain, ready access to raw materials, and the ever-opening of new markets. And the question is, the United States, which built and sustained that system, seems to be moving away from it now. To what? It's totally unclear at this point. But what seems to be emerging is a system that has kind of prevailed through most of human history, which is kind of one of great power rivalry, spheres of influence, as opposed to one more or less global system. And so if you are a company that has done well by taking advantage of those key variables, it is not axiomatic that you'll be equally comfortable in the next paradigm. So the sort of the key is that I think companies, managements, boards, they need to test the assumptions that they have made in forming their corporate strategy. And they've got to test those assumptions on a more frequent basis than they've done in the past. And I think be clear-eyed about exactly what is going on, irrespective of whether that personally they agree or disagree with the policies, and whether it will benefit their industry from a regulatory perspective or whatnot. But when you're in the insurance and reinsurance and sort of counterparty risk at the end of the day is absolutely critical. So therefore, what happens everywhere else is going to impact you as well. It's not just your industry to focus on.